Welcome to the video on pre-applications. This is an extra step that you do not have to do, but if you have a letter of intent process or a pre-application process of some sort, or if you're just interested in learning about pre-applications, this video is for you. It is not part of the standard life cycle. You basically go through the application and review process twice. There are pros and cons to this. Obviously, going through something twice creates more work, but it also weeds out the individuals that are not eligible, right? So there's this benefit of not getting ineligible applicants applying for your funding opportunity. Essentially, they submit in a small portion of the application. You review it, make sure they're eligible, approve it, and then only those applicants that are approved are invited to complete the final application. You cannot bypass the pre-application. So if you do a pre-application process, they must go through the pre-application first and be approved in order to complete the final. Now let's jump into the setup. And this video is assuming you already know how to set up a funding opportunity and your application forms. If you don't, make sure you go back to the phase 1 training videos. We're going to jump right into the setup here. So I'm going to go ahead and create my new funding opportunity by copying an old one. I could also click add. Either way, copying an old one, I'm just going to take this one and use the forms that are already set up. This particular funding opportunity that I'm copying just had a final application process. So I'm going to copy, say OK. Always start out in test status. Make sure you test your funding opportunity and your forms first before posting. I'm going to update this, and I'm going to say with pre-application process. You don't have to put that in your title. I'm just doing that for the reference. So the key item in the general information, the setup of your funding opportunity, is your pre-application yes/no question here. If you say yes, that's going to require a pre-application process, and you have to then set up pre-application forms. You can't click yes here and then not set up pre-application forms. Now I'm going to set up the deadline. I'm going to go ahead and give them a couple of months here. Now, they have to make the pre-application deadline. Remember that when we're setting this up, they have to go through the pre-application in order to get to the final. So everybody will have to make this date and time. Then, if they've been approved, that's when the final application deadline will come into play. There are some other rules you can set below. I'm going to leave the settings as they are just because it was a copied funding opportunity. And none of these settings have to do with pre-app. This is your big setting in the general information. The rest are very important for the funding opportunity setup, but again, not for the pre-app. So I'm going to leave the settings the way they are. Click Save. Again, that second step at the pre-app is making sure you have established your pre-application forms. So I'm going to go back to the funding opportunity component listing page. And here's my form bar. In the application forms, I have to have established my pre-application forms. So you can see I have final application forms. I can see that when I look at the stage of these forms. The cool thing here is you don't have to go in and establish pre-application forms in the form creator. If you already have a large application process, you can trump the settings at your funding opportunity. I'm going to repeat that again just because it's important. The funding opportunity form settings trump your form creator settings. So I can take a form that's already been defined as a final application form and say, well, I want that to be a pre-application form. I can also add new forms. So if you do have a specific form that's a pre-app form, like a letter of intent, you can add that. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add. So now I've added my additional form. You can see in the form creator, I have this already set up with the correct stage that I want. So what I have here is 3 application forms, one of which will be included in the pre-app, and then all 3 of them will show in the final application. Let's drill down to the stage and the stage copy a little bit more, because this is important. So if you're doing a pre-application process, you have 3 choices with your pre-application forms. You can make as many forms show up in the pre-app as you want. You're just going to update the stage. So if you want it to show up in the pre-app, you're going to check pre-app. So here I'm going to start with the 3 options. Option number 1 is just a pre-app, and the stage copy is saying, does it copy to the final application? So option 1 is no. It's just a pre-application form. Once I approve their pre-app, this form will completely disappear and will not be included in the final application. It will not copy to the final application. This is the least common option that's selected out of all of them. Most of the time you want to see these eligibility type questions that you'll typically ask on your pre-app. You'll want to see that included in your final application, but this is one option. So again, if it's just the pre-app and it doesn't copy to the final, they would just have this form in their pre-application. I would then review it, approve it, and then this form would disappear. They would complete their final application and it would only include these forms. The other 2 are more common, so that's including it in both the pre-application and the final application, and whether or not that data is editable when it comes over to the final. So let's talk through both of these. So when you say yes, that means yes, it's going to copy over to the final application. So I've got it selected for both stages. And let's walk through that scenario. So they complete the pre-application. I then review it and approve it. Then when they start their final application, they have their original pre-application form and 2 new forms. So they have all 3 forms at the final application. The stage copy is yes, editable on the pre-app form. So when they're in their final application, they can see what they put in their pre-application, what I've already approved, and they can edit it. The next one, we set the stage the same way to show for both. And yes, it copies to the final application, but when it gets to the final application, the data in that form that they entered that I approved is no longer editable. This is the most common selected option. It makes more sense because you've already approved the data. So if they come into their letter of intent or whatever their pre-application form is, and they've entered all this data, and then you reviewed it and you approved it based on what they entered, once they get to their final application, they can't go back and change what they entered and what you approved in that original form. The key thing here is that it's locked down. It's read-only. So you won't be able to go through a negotiation process with this form at the final application. You can negotiate it and get corrections on it, but you have to do that when it's not locked down, which is at the pre-application. So get all your corrections done. Any questions you have on that form, if you need any more information or corrections, you need to do that at the pre-application stage, because when it's in the final application, it will be read-only, meaning they can't edit it once they're in the final. So I'm going to use the most commonly used option here. And again, it's going to be the only form that shows up in their pre-application. I will review it, approve it, then they'll be invited to complete the final. When they do their final application, this form will be included as part of their application. They won't be able to change their data. And then they'll have 2 new forms to complete in their final application. So I'm going to save those settings. Now, was a lot of talking through these steps, but there's 2 steps for a final application at your funding opportunity. The first one is your general information saying, yes, I want a pre-app. The second one is establishing your pre-application forms. So I'm going to say that I have went ahead and tested this funding opportunity. We're going to skip that. There is a video on testing. Make sure you go back and watch that if you don't know how to test your funding opportunity. And now I'm going to post this opportunity, and I'm going to actually walk you through how this pre-application will work. So now it's posted. I'm going to actually log in as the applicant now. So again, I'm logged in as the applicant, the external user. I'm going to navigate and find my funding opportunity that I want to apply for. The application process for them is the same. When they locate the funding opportunity, they start the new application. That part is the same. Put in their application title. Select their organization and add any additional context they want to add to their application. Again, this three-step wizard is the same if it would have been a final application. The difference is when they get to their actual application forms, you can see the stage has been identified as a pre-application, and they only have the form that I've established as the pre-application to fill out. So notice I had 3 forms in my funding opportunity and only 1 form is showing here. That's because of the stage. Now your form could have any types of questions on it. I have a very brief form here. Once I've completed my pre-application, I can submit it in. And the applicant will show that it's submitted up until they get their email that their application has been approved. It will show and submitted. I'm now going to log in and actually approve that pre-application. So I will navigate to submitted applications, locate the funding opportunity, and here it is. Now, if you are doing the pre-application and approving them as they come in, you're actually going to see both stages sitting in here. So you could have final applications and pre-applications sitting in here if you've already approved some pre-apps. These columns are all sortable, so you can click on them, and I highly recommend you sort them by stage. It's pretty obvious when you only have 1 application in here. I do want to point something out before I release this for review. My requested total is 0. If you want the requested total to populate here, then you would have or should have included your actual budget as part of the pre-app. You can't have 2 separate budgets. You can't have a budget form and have that set to pre-app and then have a second budget that's set for the final app. It truly has to be 1 budget established to show, just like my letter of intent, for both the pre-app and the final. And most of the time with a budget, you do make the stage copy editable, so they can fill out that budget form in their pre-application, and it can be estimated at the pre-app, and then at the final application they can give you their real budgets. But it does need to be the same form. Remember, your application budget, you can modify it, so you can go through a correction process and adjust the amount. But if they are awarded into grant tracking, the budgets that you've included in the funding opportunity end up feeding into your claim. So if you have 2 budgets in your application, the pre-app budget and the final app budget, they would both feed into the claim. You don't want to do that. You want to include your actual budget as part of the pre-app or the final app. That will populate this requested total. Maybe you don't want that requested total to be populated at the pre-app. That's fine. You can set it up just like I did. You don't have to include your budget, but I do get that question a lot. Include the actual budget in the pre-app if you want that to total. You could have asked a standard question on a standard form, you know, how much, estimate your project total. And if that was on a standard form, not actually a budget form, it's still not going to populate this. And maybe that's all you need for your pre-application. That's why that did not populate, because I did not include a budget in my pre-app. So I'm going to go ahead, I can click on this and look it over. And like I said, this is the time for negotiation on this form. It will be locked after I approve it. So if I need to, I can go through a correction process and negotiate this back to the applicant. If not, I can go ahead and release it for review. At this point, it has moved into under review status, and I would go ahead and go to the reviewer assignments, assign it to a reviewer, and review this application. I am going to skip that so you don't have to watch the review process. I'm going to move straight into final approval and say, yes, I reviewed it, and I'm going to go ahead and approve it. So this is where we're going to approve it. In final approval, again, both final applications and pre-applications would be here if they're released for review. They will be in under review status. I highly recommend, if you have multiple applications sitting in here, that you sort them by stage so you can see your pre-apps all together and your final applications all together. You can approve in bulk. So over here on the right, you're going to click Edit List. And here is where you take your pre-applications and you will change the status to either approved or not approved. So let's talk about not approved really quick. Not approved would be non-eligible applicants, not invited for the final application. That would be the end of their application process. Yes, you can get it back. You can go do a search and then find that not approved and change it back to under review if you do need to get it back. If you click save or not approved, it would disappear from this listing page. This listing page only shows you under review and approved, but you can get them back in under review if you need to. If you're approving the pre-application and inviting them to do the final, that's approved status. And again, you could do many here if you had more than one. Once you click save, now that email is triggered out to the applicant, and I'm now going to log back in as the applicant. Now, instead of going to my applications here, I'm going to go back the original way. I'm going to go back to my funding opportunity. So that's the key difference for them. Funding opportunity, same funding opportunity. Up here, they see their list of current applications. Their pre-application is sitting here, still shows unsubmitted for them, but they now have this new orange button. That's that Create Final Application. That orange button is only going to be there if you've approved their pre-application. So this is their learning curve here. Go back to funding opportunities, look for that orange button. They also would have received an email with this information. Once they click Create Final Application, their stage of their application now has changed to Final Application. And just for your information, what the pre-application did is it's now archived. And now it's combined into the final application. And I want you to notice my pre-application form, my letter of intent here, is included in my final application. That's because of how I set it up in my funding opportunity. Notice that it's marked as complete already. I can see the data that I entered. So can you internally. It's part of my final application, but I don't have an edit button. I can't change it. It's already been approved. So now I can move on to my other forms. Here I've included the budget. Once all the forms are marked as complete, my final application is now completed. I'm going to go ahead and submit that in, and I'll show you what it looks like as an internal user, and then we'll be done. So again, as the internal user, I'm going to navigate back to submitted applications. Now looking in submitted applications, I will see that final application. Notice the stage. And when I look at it, it does include the original letter of intent and the other two forms. Again, this is all controlled by your funding opportunity setup. Now we're in the final application. I could release it for review as normal and go through that review process for the final application, and now it picks up and just where you would have been in a normal final application process. Thank you for watching.